who is going to give us a historical moment for the church. So kids, if you want to come up so you can be close, and kids, if you want to stay, you may stay. But here's George. Oh, and Skip. Thank you.
Say, kids, what time is it? Well, let's call it howdy doody time. A lot of the older folks in here remember howdy doody time.
That's not funny, George.
All right, well, we remember that. Those are good parts of our life. Anyways, today we're going to take a ride in our time machine way back to 1870. And a lot of you kids probably wonder what our time machine looks like. Each and every one of us has a time machine. And I'm going to show you what our time machine looks like. This is a picture of our time machine. This is the dial. And today we're going to go back to February 2nd, 1870. And here's another picture of our time machine. And today we're going to talk about this pastor of this church. But before we talk about this pastor, we're all going to get on our time machines. We're going to set the dial back to February 2nd, 1870. And away we go. Okay? All right, now we're back in 1870. And last night, all you kids stayed over in two farms that are right close to this church. The Mattoon farm and the
other farm.
The minor farm. All right, so all of you stayed overnight. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and the miners and the Mattoons are coming into your bedroom and say, okay, kids, it's time to get up. This is, why at 5? Well, we got to get ready for church. He said, but church don't start at 10. No, it starts at 8. So before we go to church, we have our chores to do. And you kids have any ideas what the chores were back then? Go ahead.
We're supposed to milk the cows and muck out the stalls and that sort of thing.
That is right. You got something to add to it? Yeah. Well, back then, you know, there was no cars, there was no paved highways, it was all wagon trails. And back when we got up early in the morning, all the kids in the farms had chores to do before they got ready for church. They would be going out into the barns, getting the girls would usually go out and get the eggs, feed the chickens, and the boys would go milk the cows and get everything ready for breakfast. And they would even have to clean out the stalls. They had to do a lot of work. And then, you know, when the kids got up, they says, hey, it's awful dark in here. Where's the light switch? I said, light switch? There's no light switch. We have to light lanterns, because electricity wasn't around then. So a couple of other kids say, well, where's the bathroom? He said, the bathroom is called an outhouse. And here's a picture of an outhouse right here. And that's my son's 35 years ago down in Hammonasset. Used to have outhouses. And you had to go out and do your duty in an outhouse. And there was no heat. So if it was like 10 degrees out, it got pretty chilly in those outhouses. Right? So then, we all go and we have breakfast. And we get ready, start getting ready for church. And so then Father says, okay, we got to get the pails and put the hot coals and the hot bricks in. He said, what's that for? Because the church is real cold, and we bring these pails in with hot coals and hot rocks to help keep us warm. So we get all the pails and say, okay, you go out and get Trigger and not Nellie Bell, but with Buttercup, the horses out in the barn, and get them hooked up to the wagon. And we had to go out and get the horses out, get the wagons hooked up. We all get in the wagon and we start coming to church. And back in those days, like I said, there's no cars, it's just full of horses and wagons out in front. So we all get ready to go into church. And back then, you know what horses do, you got to be careful where you walk, because a lot of times this church stunk pretty bad. Okay? So back in those days, this is 1870. Now 5 years earlier, they came out with commercial cigarettes. And back in the old days, before they had commercial cigarettes, people would roll their own. So this is a new gimmick, and everybody wanted to have a cigarette. So you come into this church, either everybody's smoking cigarettes, or they're smoking pipes, or they're smoking, and it stunk in here pretty bad. Okay? So anyways, back then, this fellow right here, this is Pastor Hillard, Elias Hillard. And he was 44 years old when he came to this church to start. He started back in 1869, and this guy, he was a little tough guy. Before he came to this church, he did a lot of things before he came to this church that continue on today. He wrote many books, and he wrote a book about the the last living soldiers of the Revolutionary War, and he did this in 1864, and there were 6 of them that were still alive. And you guys have any idea how old these guys were before, when he was writing about their history and their autobiography and all that? No? Anybody else have a guess?
90.
Keep going up.
100.
They ranged from 100 to 107 years old.
Wow.
The last living 6 revolutionary. So he wrote a big book about that. And even today on Amazon, you can still buy the book. So it shows you how popular it is. Another thing that this pastor really hated was alcohol. And he used to preach it a lot. He even wrote a book called The Demons of Alcoholism. And back then, if you drank, you weren't his friend. And up here in front of the church, this church looked entirely different than it does now. All this balcony here area was not here, okay? And all these pews were not here. What they did is they had what they called family pews. They would have family pews in the front of the church, and the families would buy or rent these family pews, and some of them would even put locks on the doors so nobody else could get in. It was just strictly for that family, and it's usually the very rich or the very well-known people in town. So back then, there was only a few pews in the front of the church. They had pews on the sides of the church, pews in the back, and in the middle was all chairs and stools to sit on. So it wasn't very comfortable along with that, with the smoking and all that. So it wasn't a warm church, it was cold. So, getting back, this church, you ever hear the bell ring in this church?
Mm-hmm.
You think it's pretty loud? It's pretty loud, huh? Well, to get up to where the bell tower is, you go up top of that balcony, and you climb up real steep stairs to get up into the clock tower. And you have to climb even steeper stairs to get up into the bell tower. Now, in 1858, when this church was 20 years old, they put a brand new bell in there, and this bell was a lot louder than the first bell. So this pastor hated that bell so much, every night for 20 years, he would come across the green carrying a lantern with a strip of leather. And he would climb up into the clock tower, which is very hard. Then he would climb up into the bell tower and wrap leather around the gong so you wouldn't have to hear it. And he did this for 20 years. And then he would come down in the morning and take the leather off. So he was quite a guy. And another thing too was this church in 1870 was 32 years old, and it was starting to show some signs of wear. And like I said, back then this church was always full. The balcony was full. And you see these pillars right here? Before 1870, they were made out of wood. And this whole balcony was starting to drop. So they had to take all these wood pillars out in 1870 and put cast iron pillars in, which are much stronger. And anybody have any idea? You see how many kids are here in Sunday school?
Mm-hmm.
Any idea how many kids were in Sunday school back in 1870? No, you got to go higher.
Like 70 or 60.
No, keep going.
80.
Nope, you're still too low.
90.
Go higher. Go.
100.
On average, back in the 1870s, there was 100 kids in Sunday school. And anyways, and also during this pastor, while I was here, even in town, if there was any alcoholism going on and they needed help, he would actually go in and stop the alcoholism. And a lot of that was making a lot of people mad. Say, hey, oh, why can't you know? So anyways, his wife, well, many times in this church, would have to mellow things down because he would get people mad sometimes. So she was like the girl that would step in and try to smooth things over. And like I say, another thing about Pastor Hilliard is that a lot of times, you know when you do a bad thing, you have to confess it and say, hey, I did something bad. He would have people in the church, the adults, get up front and say, hey, last week I stole a chicken or I stole a cow. They would have to publicly say what they did wrong. So things were tough back then. And anyways, you know, not next week, but the following week, we're going to go back to the very beginning of the church. I'm going to show you what our very first church looked like. And I want to leave you with a couple of things before we end this. Every night when you go to bed, is there something that you do? What do?
You pray.
That's important. Anything else that you do before you go to bed? Huh? Brush your teeth. Anybody else? Here's what I want you guys to do from now on. Before you go to bed at night, go up to your mommy and daddies, give them a hug, and tell them that you love them. Do that for the rest of your life. That's good. You're doing a good thing. And another thing, too, is last week, Bill was talking about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. There was grumpy, there was smiley, there was happy. So what we want to be is we want to be happy and smiley. And if you ever run, you know, a lot of grumpy people out there, ever run out, see somebody not wearing a smile, you give them yours. Okay, kids? And we'll see each other, not next week, but the following week. We'll talk about the very beginning of this church. Thanks, kids.
Thank you.